English translation, 705th contact Wednesday, the 14th of March 2018, 21:58 hours.
Here I am again, Bermunda. Sorry to keep you waiting. Wednesday is always the day we do correction work on my books together in the kitchen in the evening. If you had not knocked on the door, I would not have come to the office to check after Barbara did not see anyone when she went to check. You should have just called me, then I could have told you that I would not come to the office until around 22 o'clock HRS.
It was a bit confusing for me, so I knocked on the door to the kitchen.
It's okay. It is just because it would have been easier if you had just called me like you usually do, like everyone else does. But it seems to me that you do not just come in private for a chat today.
A chat? What does that mean?
The meaning is simple, because a Schwatz in Swiss German simply means a shorter, casual conversation, a Plauderei, or a Plauderstundchen, or a Gehplotter. Colloquially, a chat is also called gossip. But the term is also known in German, where, for example, in northern Germany it is called Klonschnack, in southern Germany Plausch, as is also partly the case in Austrian, where Plauscherl is also used in a familiar way. Jargon-wise, a Schwatz is also called talk, based on English.
As often as I visit you, I always learn something new, whereby you can explain everything in such detail every time that I really always understand everything.
That is part of my job, because if I am to explain something, then it must surely be that it is also understood. Because an incomplete explanation is just empty babbling, raises new questions and leads to incomprehension on the one hand, and misunderstanding on the other.
That is undoubtedly so.
Yes, but now I would like to say for once that it is simply amazing to me again and again how quickly you have learned my mother tongue in addition to German, as is the case with everyone else.
You know what opportunities we have for language learning? This in addition to the fact that you always teach us in a lively manner during our visits regarding your mother tongue and the German language, which you master very well. But you are right that I am not visiting you privately today in the usual way for a chat, because I am supposed to report to you what latest findings Yanarara and Zafanat Paniach have gained with regard to how the unpleasant disturbances, insertions, and destructions in your computer come about, respectively how they get into it and affect your work.
I am curious about that, because Bernadette is also experiencing the same phenomenon. For months now, strange changes have been appearing in the texts that I write, and then pass on to her via our network or printout. But now it has also happened with her that a longer piece of writing has simply disappeared from her computer, and she has had to write it all again. This is what has happened and continues to happen to me, which is extremely obstructive in terms of speedy work and progress. Yanarara and Zafanat Paniach have, after all, been working for a long time to clarify this unpleasant matter, as also in regard to the sectarian swinging waves which have such an unpleasant and disadvantageous effect on health.
I am to tell you about this, namely what Zafanat Paniach and Yanarara have now found out quite clearly. The fact is that the very unpleasant disturbances and destructions that are being introduced into your computer and now also into Bernadette's computer are without any doubt being maneuvered in through the power lines. This is a very new technique, developed in a secret manner, and has existed since the time when the first malicious disturbances were practiced and destructive damage caused with regard to your computer and thus your work. The knowledge now gained clearly proves that the whole thing is controlled and fed into the power lines via the power grid, but not from a certain ascertainable fixed location. Consequently, no location could be found from where a feed into the energy network takes place. Now, however, Yanarara and Zafanat Paniach registered a very widespread and high electromagnetic swinging waves, the origin of which they have not yet been able to find, but which contain a clearly disturbing and destructive chronology, which is without any doubt exactly fixed on your computer. And since you are also connected to Bernadette with your device, her device is also affected. And the influence, which takes place on the entire nationwide existing energy network, on which you are also dependent with your computer device, takes place through a wireless electromagnetic swinging waves influence, which is known to you as radio transmission, whereby, however, the transmitter or the transmitting center could not yet be determined, from which the electromagnetic swinging waves emanate. This is because the entire, very far-reaching oscillation field is pronounced in the same strength in the entire area, which is why no transmitter location could be found so far. So the transmission of disturbing and destructive information takes place through electromagnetic waves or swinging waves which directly hit the electrical energy network and penetrate into it, whereby the whole thing is so exclusively directed towards your computer that it only hits and affects it, as well as Bernadette's, because these two devices are used by you in cooperation. The type is a form of targeted hacking by hackers, as you call this approach, whereby an infiltration into your computer takes place by technically highly skilled professionals in terms of hardware and software mastery. It is not a matter of vulnerabilities in your computer system, for the unauthorized infiltration of your computer and the alteration and destruction of your valuable work is a controlled function to prevent you from revealing the truth of the worldwide deception and lying of religions and cults concerning an imaginary God and his alleged laws, recommendations and other silliness, futilities, and absurdities. Further, however, this is also to prevent you from openly and uncensoredly naming the mendacity and deceitfulness of politics, and the real truth of world political and military as well as Secret Service machinations in the actual way they really are, and as we name them to you in such a way as they are not named in any earthly media but are concealed. Basically, this is also connected with the effort of this grouping to silence you, which also states that in the course of the last 50 years or so, the 23 assassination attempts on you were controlled by this grouping. From a political as well as a religious and sectarian point of view, but also from the point of view of the arms industry, secret services, and various organizations of various kinds, we have come to very unpleasant conclusions. These show very clearly why you are prevented from spreading the real truth in the sense of religions, sects, and politics, the military, the secret services, and a larger number of various organizations. And the whole thing serves only to ensure that in the political, religious, sectarian, economic, secret service, banking, and organizational elites, the greed for money and power continues to run rampant, and that neither peace, justice, nor real freedom on earth and equality and hatredlessness among all peoples can become a reality. These were also the real reasons why all governments and public media since your work as early as the 1940s did not heed and did not disseminate all your calls, admonitions and warnings as well as preliminary statements to the earthly governments and renowned media. And they are still doing so today, ridiculing you and accusing you of lies and deceit, while also spreading insults, lies, and slander about you. So everything is being done by a group we have not yet been able to identify, but which we understand to be religious, sectarian and political, as well as military, economic, and intelligence, to deliberately disrupt and alter the functions of your computer equipment or to cause destructive damage by modifying it or adding false and faulty components. In principle, there is no restriction on the type of devices that can be hacked and manipulated, ranging from simple electrical devices, such as kitchen appliances, to highly complex and sophisticated technical products, such as game consoles, smart home products, etc. This grouping, which is still secret to us and which, according to our knowledge, corresponds to an effectively far-reaching organization, is very advanced in technical terms, etc., and has an extremely creative approach to great electronic engineering. They carry out their activities in order to maintain the might of the elites of politics, religions and sects, the economy, the arms industry, the secret services, as well as the banks and the organizations involved in the whole, whereby it is also a question of maintaining strife, as well as the oppression of the people's freedom and justice. This organization, which is still unknown to us, has a worldwide effect, as the electromagnetic waves or very powerful oscillations detected by Yanarara and Zafanat prove, which also carry sequences that are detrimental to peace and promote hatred, which affect human beings around the earth and influence them maliciously, as well as fundamentally degrading all efforts for peace and making it impossible. In addition, through these swinging waves in the software and internet environment, manipulations are being carried out with regard to the hardware, which are insidiously aimed at influencing and aligning all peoples in such a suggestive way through the television, radio, computer, and internet systems that they become willfully obedient to the machinations of the upper elites. In this way, the powerful elites of politics, religions, sects and the weapons industry, economy, banks, secret services, and all organizations acting in the same way, etc., can continue to prevent peace, equality, and the freedom of all human beings in the individual as well as in the whole world. And this is being done in such a way that hatred is being driven up among all peoples, be it through religions, sects, politics, and all other machinations of any elements that sow hatred and nip in the bud every effort to bring about peace and the bearing and exercising of self-responsibility, as well as destroying every semblance of justice and freedom.
Very pleasant news you bring me, Bermunda. And the fact that hatred is constantly being sown is also being proven at present, as a Russian ex-spy and his daughter are in mortal danger in England because they have been poisoned with a Russian agent, as happened once before with a Russian, also in England. The climax is that Brexit envoy May and the majority of the English government gang are accusing Russia of having carried out the assassination, without any proof, and simply taking the poison as evidence, which is supposed to be or is of Russian origin. So, the traditional hatred against Russia is once again boiled up by England, as well as sanctions are simply taken and Russian officials etc. are expelled from the country. Although there is no evidence whatsoever that Russia had a hand in this assassination, but everything is based on evil and hateful assumptions and on cowardly fear of a resurgent Russia. And all this only as a result of pathological prejudice and sheer conjecture that neither proves anything concrete, nor considers that anything could be other than negligent, rash and irresponsible conjecture. Maybe someone from Russia has something to do with it, as would be possible, for example, out of feelings of hatred and revenge, but maybe not. The crime may also have been carried out elsewhere in a way that has nothing to do with Russia, but can be traced back to purely private conflicts, antagonisms, and to a frustration and bitterness. But be that as it may, for on the one hand there is the possibility of the matter being cleared up, but on the other hand, there is also the possibility that the whole origin, the course of events, and the perpetrators can never be established. The fact is, however, that England is completely disregarding the fact that Russia wants to clarify the whole thing and is therefore demanding a sample of the poison found in order to examine it and clarify its origin and nature, as well as where it may have come from, etc., to which England and Prime Minister Theresa May are not offering a hand, but only accusations and hate speech. So the Russian request is not granted, but Russia is simply accused, as the West has always done since time immemorial and continues to do now. And of course, as it has always been the case, the US is also a conniving participant, having never been held accountable for any of the war crimes committed in any of the wars fought around the world, and having got away scot-free. Consequently, in my opinion, they will also continue in their criminal war activities in the future and continue to crave world domination, for which they sow unrest all over the world, just as England and the EU dictatorship work in an all-round hostile and warmongering manner and sow discord. And what results from all the megalomaniac actions, doings and behavior of the EU dictatorship and the USA are inevitably hostilities. Acts of violence, hatred, and ultimately fighting as a result of the USA's also the EU dictatorship's bullshit provocatively rising up against Russia. But not enough of that, because the EU dictatorship is also laboring along in the same hate-driven and overflowing framework of its dirty hostility towards Russia. And also in Switzerland I have heard idiotic speeches condemning Russia without hesitation from equally pathologically stupid and intelligence-less elements, as is the case in England, the USA, and the EU dictatorship. Effectively, brainless and good-for-nothing elements are at work all around, saturated with hatred against Russia, who have to shout out their stupidity and imbecility to the whole world. Because in their primitive primitiveness, they do not realize that in their intelligencelessness, they are less than an exceedingly useless and deadly insect. Such an insect will at least still be trampled on, whereas these consciousness-disturbed people, in their stupidity, intelligence limitation, and elementary wretchedness of mind and reason, do not even have so much of value in themselves that they will be trampled on. So it is impossible for them to have even a glimmer of reason and rational thought in them to ask themselves why the ex-spy, who farewell to Russia, was not secretly killed there, because no one there would have crowed about it, because it would probably not have been noticed. But the hatred against Russia, which has existed like a deadly plague in England, practically in all of Europe and in the USA since time immemorial, but which also flares up again and again at every possible and impossible opportunity to defame Russia, its government, and the entire Russian population, is on the one hand a tradition of the West, which believes itself to be better than Russia, and on the other hand, a means of money and might, through which discord and lack of freedom can be maintained. This is precisely because, on the one hand, the war industry and the entire economy, etc., can be maintained through armament and the trade in war material, etc. While, on the other hand, it is possible to continue a permanent state of feud and to maintain an equality of weapons of war, and thus lie that this is necessary in order to maintain peace. But a so-called peace in the manner of an equality of weapons of war is in reality not peace, but a cold war, which can be plunged into a hot war at any time by the delusional, power-hungry ruling elites of the states. And if this happens, then the peoples are so stupid and dumb that they bow to the orders of the warmongers, allow themselves to be suggestively seduced into murder and go to war, either to lose their own lives, or by becoming killers and rapists and unthinkingly killing, murdering, and massacring other innocent human beings. And this is done because the power elites order it, but the people simply howl along with the elite wolves without thought, sense, or responsibility instead of thinking for themselves, deciding correctly and taking responsibility in this regard so that no war can be waged, but peace, freedom, and justice can be created. This, however, on the one hand in every human being himself, on the other hand in every family and community, and in every country and people, and indeed all over the world.
You speak from my heart and in my mind with every word. If all that you have said were followed by the human beings of this world, as well as all that you have taught since your youth, then the earth would be a paradise, and the whole populations of all countries would be a humanity of true peace, whose reputation in this respect would spread honorably throughout the universe. This is in contrast to what is the case today, since there is constant talk of discord, hatred, racism, lack of freedom, inequality, war, criminality, crime and destruction when the earth, its humanity and all that is happening daily, year after year and for thousands of years on this planet by the earth's population, which in many ways has completely degenerated. With us on Era, news is also spread, as is the case on Earth, whereby of course it is also pointed out what is happening on Earth in all ways. The same information is also spread among our federates, so what is happening on Earth is known far and wide in the universe.
Well said and good, Bermunda. But you are well oriented regarding earthly humanity and its disastrous machinations and behaviors. And that you spread news of Earth among yourselves and your federates, I already know that from Svath, from the father of Ptah. But I also want to say, I did not know that you also say that something like an impulse comes from the heart, because I have never heard anything like that from Playarin. So I thought that this way of speaking was one that only occurred with us on Earth.
No, we also use the same values. Now, if I may raise a question?
Of course.
Since I have been stationed here on Earth, I have been concerned with the various religions and their incredibly vicious outgrowths, which have made their appearance from the earliest times and are also still wreaking havoc in a vicious way at the present time. I would like to talk to you about this in detail, if I may ask you. I am also interested in how you define religious belief.
Of course we can sit down and talk about it sometime, But we have to be able to allow enough time for that because the whole thing is extremely wide-ranging. A little time travel would be suitable for this, because in that way we could devote ourselves to this subject calmly and without being pressed for time, if you can arrange that.
That may be possible.
Good. Then you tell me in the near future when we can do this. But what else you asked concerning my definition of religious faith? I can also tell you now how I judge that. A faith related to a religion and sect corresponds to an erroneous, absolutely unrelated to reality and its truth, illusion as well as stupid, ill-considered, absolutely nonsensical, mindless, irrational, and ridiculous speculation.
Thanks. Your answer says precisely how I myself judge every religious belief, but also how we Pliar and generally understand this nonsense that is out of touch with reality. Every religious belief of any kind confuses the mind and reason in a bad way, as it also impairs self-decision and the exercise of self-responsibility. Human beings who believe in religion also shrink back in fear of alleged sins and divine punishment when they have to come up with their own thoughts and make their own decisions and actions, and are not sure whether these correspond to their imagined godliness. For us, it is incomprehensible that such a delusion can be indulged in, which is so confused and so out of touch with truth and reality that even a human being who is severely limited in consciousness must recognize the nonsensical nature of such an erroneous belief. Our incomprehensibility in this respect relates in a special way to the Christian religion, because with its story of lies concerning the resurrection from death, it surpasses all conceivable nonsense, to such an extent that not only a human being who is severely limited in consciousness must recognize the nonsense of such an erroneous belief, but even one who is a slave to madness and completely devoid of all understanding and reason. The fact that undisguised hatred and fantasies of violence also arise from this story of lies are spread and subliminally influence the lives of believers in Christ and determine their actions and deeds, is an inevitable consequence when their hatred breaks through openly and demands revenge, as for example in disputes and war. This deviant and overgrown faith in Christ corresponds to a very special delusion, of which every human being who believes in Christ must be ashamed, because this faith contradicts everything that is reality and truth, common sense and conscious reason, and thus the values that every modern and enlightened human being on earth should strive for and represent. But this happens because the believers lack understanding and reason, namely all human beings who are addicted to religion and belief in God, so that they force their offspring to believe and to be alienated from reality and truth at an early age. Therefore, every religious belief, no matter what kind, is already fundamentally dangerous to young people and absolutely unsuitable for their offspring, even at a young age, because their personal development towards independence and perception of reality and truth is maliciously destroyed by the belief. The human beings on earth who emulate a religious faith and believe themselves to be powerful in their intellect and reason prove that their abilities with regard to intellect, reason, and the recognition of reality and truth are still very poorly developed. Every belief in a God, a religion, and any associated piety corresponds to a fact of faith-based stultification and bondage, or a permanent subjugation of the human being's own will to the delusion of an unnatural, compulsive, and self-torturing obsession with faith. Every religious belief corresponds to an unreality that is consistently shaped in such a way, especially in the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic religions, that the respective deity in all religions is gladly portrayed as peace-loving, merciful, and just, and proclaimed as omnipotent, while at the same time each is illustrated as punitive, demanding, unfree, and coercive. But how irritating this nonsensical portrayal of God really is. The believers in God and religion are unable to grasp in their lack of understanding, their lack of reason, and thus also in their inability to comprehend their lack of logic. On the one hand, the believers, in their confused irritation, believe their God to be the loving creator of the world and the sustainer of all things, and as the all-loving, blessing, and just God the Father, etc. But on the other hand, they glorify him at the same time as a God of war, a merciless god of revenge and an evil xenophobe, even as a mass murderer and sexual perpetrator of violence. And that from every religious belief and every god-worship delusion very evil mischief arises. The followers of the faith are neither able to recognize nor to understand, which is why, since the first emergence of a belief in a higher power that was considered a deity, disputes have arisen among the believers who worshipped and venerated various higher powers and deities. These disputes, which arose very early on, very quickly degenerated into hatred among the various delusions of faith, with the result that bloody acts of revenge and subsequently wars of faith and wars of religion arose among the various faith groups. And these are waged fanatically, stupidly and primitively, as well as with contempt for life and human beings, up to the present day in a very vicious manner contrary to understanding and reason, whereby countless human beings are murdered, bestially massacred, and immense destruction is caused. From the perspective of reality and truth, of that which religious faith actually is, neither peace nor freedom can become a reality on earth and among its humanity as long as religions and faith in deities prevail. This is so because every religious delusion among all the different religions and their believers leads to differences of faith and thus to hatred against those of other faiths and thus to religious hatred, from which not only quarrels and strife but also bloodshed, murder, torture, wars, massacres, destruction, and ever-increasing terrorism result, as is shown by the events that have always occurred on Earth in this respect. In principle, this should be extremely irritating for the believers, but they are unable to perceive this due to their inconsequential thinking and are therefore incapable of a fundamentally correct judgment. With religious believers, there is an almost insurmountable lack of understanding and reason with regard to a clear and reasonable ability to recognize and judge reality and the truth given in it alone, because in this respect an intelligence that is still too weakly developed dominates. In their blindness of faith and unreasonableness, as well as in their lack of intellect, religious believers are unable to perceive this because their delusion makes them incapable of cultivating rational thoughts. As a result, they are unable to determine anything and everything about themselves with a sound mind and clear reason, but are always dependent on nonsensical beliefs, which make them believe that their God guides them and rules over them, and that they therefore have to do and carry out their actions and deeds in the way they are told by him. In this delusion, every value-determining decision to be made by oneself is already disregarded in principle, whereby not only self-determination but also the duty to create self-responsibility is suppressed, just as no independent effort of self-knowledge and no clear self-awareness can come into effect. These are my observations, but not the conclusion of all my gained knowledge, for this leads much further and would take a longer time to explain everything.
You have brought out a heavy weapon with what you have said, Bermunda. But thank you, because your explanations correspond exactly to my meaning and say what corresponds to reality. Unfortunately, the believers who follow religions and their deities, and are hopelessly addicted to them, do not recognize reality, nor do they recognize the truth contained therein. In reality, it is unfortunately the case that the believers in religion and God are completely blind and deadened to reality and truth, as a result of which they are also unable to perceive them. Actually, reality and its truth are two completely different values, which on the one hand are real and must be understood by every human being, but on the other hand there is a third factor, namely perception. Effectively, it is the case that this is dependent on reality for the human being and his understanding of truth. The fact is that only that which he can effectively perceive with his senses, seeing, hearing, physically feeling as well as experiencing and witnessing, through his clear mind and pure reason and logically or consequently judge, understand and rationally or reasonably comprehend, experience and witness in himself as effective knowledge of truth, can be truthful. Therefore, nothing can and must ever be considered true and accepted as truth if it cannot be comprehended, explained, and inwardly neither experienced nor witnessed by seeing, hearing, physically feeling, experiencing, rationally or reason-guided purposeful thinking, as well as not clear reality-related sense. Effectively, it must always be taken into account and considered that no relativization may come about. That is to say that something that is demonstrably assigned to reality and thus to truth is not put into relation with something religiously believable and thereby limited in its validity and value, as well as becoming unclear, diffuse, truth-falsifying, speculative, and unreal in its actual meaning. If something that cannot be clearly and distinctly accepted by seeing, hearing, or physically feeling, experiencing, and witnessing it, then it is thoughtlessly taken for true, whereby at the same time and inevitably a relativization is already involved. This is because something that is without understanding and reason, thoughtless, unexamined, and without proof of reality in relation to clear seeing, hearing, physical feeling, as well as experiencing and witnessing is only accepted and thus believed, and consequently does not necessarily have to be true because it is only believed to be true. Believing something means accepting something that is considered true, right, or possible and is approved of, for which, however, no effective proof of reality is given, as is the case with any religious belief that is founded in the context of an imaginative and even delusional conviction, whereby every conviction is in any case based on a suggestive self-persuasion or persuasion by others. Therefore, if something is believed, then it is thoughtlessly, uncritically, and unrealistically assumed or believed that the object of the assumption or belief is reality, which in reality cannot be effectively perceived because it is only envisioned, imagined, and delusional, and thus believed. Consequently, this is not a real and true-to-life perception, but an unreal imagination and illusion that does not correspond to reality. This is also connected with a very far-reaching insecurity, because the unreality of a religious belief cannot be perceived with any human senses, nor can such a belief be experienced and known. And if any impulses do occur in the believing human being, then these correspond to nothing other than delusion-triggered inner sensations, etc., which are only caused by the prevailing religious delusion of faith, and are erroneously and confusedly considered to be divine impulses and signs. Every religious belief is characterized in such a way that it cannot be recognized that it does not even in the slightest way correspond to a relative reality and truth, but only to an imagination and a delusion. If the real truth is to come into effect, then it is never to be found in any religion, in a belief in religion and God or in anything similar, but solely and exclusively in the effective and real reality, as this is recognizable in the entire universe for every normal, rationally, and intellectually healthy human being, and can be understood and comprehended intelligently and reasonably. So the effective truth comes from a completely different, real and actually existing instance, namely from the real reality, but not from erroneous, confused, stupid and consciousness-confusing illusions, fantasies, and delusions, which are oriented towards bondage and pathologically humble, self-denying and self-degrading worship of an imaginary deity. In and of itself, every human being has his or her own perception of effective reality, whereby perception, however, is controlled by reason, intelligence, alertness, and a sense of reality, and thereby deception is prevented, which is also a good thing and cannot be changed. Consequently, it is also a fact that, if all things are perceived on the basis of the values of one's own possibilities in relation to conscious clarity of the ability to observe, the ability to judge as well as previous experience and the resulting experiences, cognitions, and all sensibilities, the whole can also be judged according to the truth anchored in everything. This does not mean, however, that the personal perception and judgment of the actual real reality, the individual view, seeing, hearing, physical feeling as well as experiencing, learning, understanding, reasoning, and comprehension is impaired, because fundamentally every real reality and its truth can only be perceived, recognized, and understood as real reality in such a way and in every case as it actually is. If, however, something is interpreted into the perception of reality and its evaluation, then this corresponds fundamentally to a deception and falsification, and thus also to a false perception or a false observation, which takes place through a careless, unclear, imprecise, indifferent, sloppy, irresponsible, neglectful, dissolute and negligent observation or pseudo-observation and pseudo-perception, whereby an illusion results. But this also says that one person's perception and judgment of reality can never be another person's perception and judgment of reality, because any judgment of someone else's reality can only be perceived and judged by that person alone. And this is a fact precisely because every human being is to be judged with regard to his perceptive faculty concerning real reality according to the degree of his effective attentiveness, freedom from delusion and his real individual view, seeing, hearing, physical feeling as well as way of experiencing, learning, understanding, reasoning, and comprehension. And the more positive these values are, the more reality-conforming the human perception is with regard to the values of his way of seeing, hearing, physical feeling and experiencing, learning, understanding, reasoning and comprehension, as well as the assessment of reality and its truth. The effective reality corresponds to that which individually affects the human being through real seeing, hearing, physical feeling as well as through experiencing, reasoning and understanding, and produces a corresponding effect in him. This is in contrast to every religious belief, which is only caused by self or other suggestive imagination and delusions and can neither be seen, heard, physically felt nor really experienced, but is only based on illusions, fantasies, reveries, thought and feeling as well as sensory illusions, confused pretenses of false pretenses, mirages, hallucinations, delusions and fantasies. If a human being perceives something in reality, such as by seeing, hearing, physically feeling as well as by experiencing, then he behaves according to what is objectively perceived, which does not remain without effect, because the effective real reality affects him in its own way, and he sees what he perceives in such a way as it irrefutably actually corresponds to reality. But this also means that the same real situation and reality has the same effect on every rational and reasonable human being, and therefore does not differ, because every rational and intelligent human being does not simply interpret something individually, but uses, evaluates, judges, understands, and acts according to reality. In this way he is understanding and reasonable according to the incontrovertible reality and the truth resulting from it, but without introducing any form of belief into it, and thus falsifying the reality of reality. If an interpretation is made with regard to the real reality, then this must take place through a deception-free or unadulterated perception, through a conscious clarity of understanding, reason and a healthy, value-high intelligence potential, which has nothing to do with the nonsensical false evaluation of IQ. This alone can define real and effective reality and its incontrovertible truth without belief, inclusions, and limitations. If real reality were only subjective from a human point of view, it could not at the same time be the indisputable truth, for reality and the truth resulting from it alone is generally uniformly comprehensive, and indeed all universal. Consequently, it can never be individual. For every individual is subject to limitations, because it separates itself absolutely from the whole of the all-embracing, unified, all-valid, solely real and solely true. For this reason alone, man should perceive reality extremely clearly, consciously, attentively and free of deception and not be distorted by assumptions, deceptions, other additions and by factors of faith, because any additions foreign to reality result in a limited perception of reality, its evaluation and the truth resulting from the effective real reality. Fundamentally, it must also be said that the most important thing is that there should not be any dispute about reality and the only truth that emerges from it. Nor can there be any dispute, because reality and truth correspond to two inseparable factors, which on the one hand have been given universally since the beginning of the creation, but which on the other hand also correspond to absolute logic or consistency, and are irrefutable. If a human being has only one subjective, that is to say, only one personal reality and truth, then this is on the one hand an unfortunate, stupid, unworldly, and confused state of self-centeredness, egoism, sheer megalomania, as well as craving for recognition, arrogance, and pathological presumption. Such a person is self-important, exalts himself in all things in a self-glorifying and self-exalting manner, places himself and his opinion as well as his actions and deeds gigantomaniacally above all fellow human beings, maliciously allows only his arrogance and his wrong attitude directed and aligned and degenerated towards false fellow humanity and his pathological wrong behavior in this respect to be valid. But all this cannot conform to the general and effective reality and its truth, let alone be used with it or even associated with it. Consequently, it cannot be argued in any way that if a reality and truth are purely subjective, then they have something to do with the effective and real reality and truth. There can be no dispute about the actual and real reality and its truth, which already came into being 46 trillion years ago during the creation of universal consciousness, and which exists for all times and has an unrestricted, uniform, and all-embracing validity, because what reality and truth are has eternal, all-embracing permanence. For this reason, people can only argue about things that are in some way subjective, and of which it is assumed that their opinion and the object of their dispute is something true, for which they shout about in the dispute and advocate it precisely in the assumption or belief, whereby this, however, is not of a religious nature in this way, but is founded purely in negations and delimitations in relation to other views and opinions or in relation to anythings. Rights, wishes, demands, reproaches, and promises, etc., or in parts of the same.
Amazing.
What do you mean by that?
I am amazed at how detailed and understandable you are able to explain everything.
But that is no surprise, for on the one hand I had a very good teacher in my boyhood, namely Svath, the father of Ptah. On the other hand, it gave me great pleasure to learn everything that was offered to me by Svath, and also later by Asket, Simyase, Quetzal, Pleja, and Ta, etc., as well as by human beings in various countries on Earth. I was also able to learn a lot through experiences and to acquire a little more knowledge than I could only gain through my school education. So I think that there is nothing special about what I have tried to explain, which is why there is no need to talk about it any further. Besides, I'm interested in something that I would like to ask you, if I may.
Just ask.
Are you also interested in the politics that have been practiced here on Earth since time immemorial in such a catastrophic way that there is constant unrest resulting in discord, unfreedom and injustice, as well as murderous atrocities, massacres, wars and destruction, and political and religious sectarian terrorism? And since I am interested in this regard, then I would also like to know, if you are concerned with this, what you think of the time-honored and, since the emergence of the United States of America, world-dominating and warmongering heirs.
I am sorry to tell you that I am only marginally concerned with this because my duties are elsewhere. But if you are so much interested in how all that you have asked is judged according to our knowledge and findings, then I can ask my father if he wants to be helpful to you with regard to your interest, and explain some things to you about it. He could do that very well because he was on Earth as an observer at the time of the birth of the United States of America and also later. But he is also still busy with this task today and is occasionally present on Earth with a small special observation group, which is why it should be possible for him to visit you and answer your questions. However, I would have to be there if it would be convenient for you to translate everything he says into your language, because he speaks neither German nor Swiss German. A language translator could also be used, of course, depending on your convenience then.
Of course, but that can still be clarified if your father can agree. But it is interesting because I did not know about what you said, but I also do not have to be informed about everything that is not directly related to my work. But what you say now prompts me to ask how many different groupings of you Plejaran are functioning around Earth, and whether they will all leave the planet together when I am gone.
That you have never asked about what you have just done, that is known to me, so I also know that you are not wondering and know nothing about it. But if you now ask, may I tell you that it need not be a secret to you or to any human beings that we Plejaran have stationed a grouping on each continent of the planet. Some of our members whom we maintain and keep up contacts with you are only here on Earth for a limited time.
Aha, and what about when it was said that from the year 2028 there would be a complete withdrawal from Earth?
That will indeed be the case. But now it is time for me to leave again because I have to devote myself to my work again. I will ask my father and report to you if he agrees to come to you, but that can be next month at the earliest, when he will be back to his observational work.
There is no hurry, but I would be glad to make his acquaintance and hear what he has to say. Unknown to him, however, I will give him my regards.
Then I must go now. Farewell.
Goodbye.
That will be so.